So here we are on the last day of this ERN course. Today in my last lecture I will be talking about insights on brand failures. In the last class I talked about the factors which result in brand success. Today through some real life examples I will be talking about some of the important reasons which result in brand failures. In the last class I have mentioned about a book. Today also I will ask you at the end as a reference to go through a book. So let us start our discussion on brand failures. Now, I'm sure it is pretty much evident to you by now that consumers, most of the time, they purchase a product or a service based on the brand image that they have in their mind. That means based on your perception about the brand, you make the purchase rather than considering the attributes, the benefits, the features. So consumers often base their purchasing decisions on their perception of a brand rather than the actual quality of the product. It happens in case of products also, like if it is coming from Dell, it will be of good quality. If it is from Microsoft, it will be of great quality. It happens in case of services also. So before you visit a hotel, you believe that this brand of hotel or this chain of hotels, they are great. You go to a college, even before you attend the classes, your perception is that it's a very good college, quality of education, great placement. So based on the brand image, many a times we end up making the purchase. This can lead to brands being valued more highly than their tangible assets. That means, in our mind, the perception about the brand, that matters more than the product itself. So when we talk about brand, the product part or the service part is also involved. But we take the decision based on the brand rather than the tangible asset, rather than the product itself. But it also means that they can lose this value very quickly. So it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, the perception of the brand, the image of the brand, that plays a very important role in influencing the purchase decision, that can bring in success, but at the same time it can also lead to failure very quickly. And there have been many instances where the product or the service is of good quality, it's okay, but still it has resulted in failure because perception about the brand, that changed. People's perception of the brand, that changed. So this happens in movies also. So if this movie star is there, so even before the movie is released, what happens? It gives back the cost, the producer gets back the money that he or she has already spent on the movie. Okay? So there is a hype, there is a perception that if this movie is featuring a Shah Rukh Khan or a Salman Khan, it will be a great movie. The advance bookings are very high. That is based on what? You're booking the ticket based on what? Based on your perception about Salman Khan, about Shah Rukh Khan, okay? Rather than watching the movie and then coming to a decision that whether it's good or bad. So that's what we are trying to tell you. The brand becomes much more important than the actual product or service. So branding is a very important statement. Branding pre-sells the product or service to consumers. Okay, that's what I was explaining so far. Now, what is a brand failure? We talked about the factors leading to brand failure, but what it actually means. A brand failure occurs when a product or service does not meet customers' expectations, leading to poor sales, negative brand perception, or market exit. So, when brand failure happens, then what are the ultimate outcomes? What happens to the brand? So its sales starts to fall, okay? Customers' perception becomes negative, and most of the times, until and unless maybe you can go for repositioning, but many a times the ultimate outcome is exit from the market. Okay? And there are plenty of examples that I will talk about where the brand even is launched with a lot of hype, there's a lot of positive expectations or reactions from the market, but still it failed. I'll talk about these examples in details, but just initially to give you a feeling of what are the reasons what are the possible reasons for brand failure. When a brand loses sight of its core identity, it can encounter significant problem. And the classic example that I will talk about a little bit later is Coca-Cola's new Coke. Okay, so what happened? Coca-Cola came up with the same drink for almost 100 years, and then in the 80s, it came up with this new Coke to compete with Pepsi. I'll talk about the details. So what they did, they stopped manufacturing the traditional Coca-Cola and they replaced that with this new Coke, and they failed miserably. So I'll talk about that in details because people could not relate that with the original one. Then there are some brands over a passage of time, because they are doing well, they become egoistic, they become overconfident. They feel whatever they are offering, the market will accept it. They go for expansion. They feel that in whichever field will expand, we will be very successful, and they fail. So the tendency of some brands is to overestimate their significance and capabilities. So what they are producing for a long period of time, it will remain successful no matter how the market changes, no matter how customers' taste and preferences change. And the classic example that I will talk about here is Polaroid, where they fail to accept the fact that the market has moved from the traditional cameras to digital. Sometimes a brand feels that the brand name is just good enough to introduce any kind of product or service in the market. So if the brand name is very strong, even if I introduce a very kind of product which is a very low price or in whatever domain, it will be successful. The other day I talked about the success story of the brand Virgin, and I told you how successfully they have expanded different domains, the different products, the different product categories. And I also told you that in one case they failed miserably, that is Virgin Cola. Okay, where Branson thought that Virgin can compete with Coca-Cola and Pepsi. So again, launched with a lot of fanfare, a lot of media coverage, it failed miserably. So we'll talk about this also. So what brand managers need to they need to work constantly to come up with strategies so that they remain relevant in the market. So adaptation with the changes, adaptability, that becomes a very important factor. And one company which is doing that pretty well is Kodak. Although they faced some difficulties, but the transition from the analog cameras to the digital camera, at that time they faced some problem, but in the long run they were able to make that transition and survive in the market, which Polaroid failed to do. So now let me go to some of the real life cases and try to understand why they failed. So first is Coca-Cola's New Coke. So when did Coca-Cola started its business? Any idea? Because it came up with something new. Cola was not there before Coca-Cola. They were kind of inventor for this particular product. So when they started business, any idea?
Earlier 19th century.
Yeah, it's in 19th century, but not in the early part of the 19th century. The later part of the 19th century, they started their business somewhere around 1880s. Okay. So you can think that this company or this brand has survived for 160 years now. So Coca-Cola was launched in the 1880s, and for the next 100 years, they made the same product, the same cola with the same taste. That means they didn't tweak with the formula, with the content of the original cola. So by the time Second World War ended, Coca-Cola has captured the cola market almost in all the places across the globe. Okay. And since World War II was going on and it ended, many people used to say that, see, look at Coca-Cola. They have peacefully captured the entire world. Okay? Because in war you do not do it. But Coca-Cola, in a peaceful way, have captured the entire world. That was what people were saying in a kind of sarcastic manner. But then Pepsi came, and although Pepsi's market share was less than Coca-Cola, but they were turning out to be a very strong competitor. Now, there is a difference in the taste also, because Pepsi was little bit sweeter. It was more sweet than Coca-Cola, and people were actually preferring Pepsi in the 60s, especially the younger generation, 60s, 70s. So Pepsi positioned themselves as a cola drink for the young people. Because among the young people, Pepsi started to become more popular than Coca-Cola. Then Pepsi came up with a blind test. You know what is a blind test?
Without looking into the...
So you put a kind of wrap around your eyes, you can put a wrap around the eyes of the customers, and then you give them both the drinks. So they are not able to see which is Coca-Cola and which is the Pepsi. And they conducted these tests, and it was found that in this blind test, majority of the people are preferring this Pepsi rather than Coca-Cola. So that was a kind of alarm bells for Coca-Cola, that slowly and steadily Pepsi is eating up its market share. Okay. And then Pepsi positioned itself as the generation next cola. So in the 1980s, what happened? When this competition was intensified, Coca-Cola came up with Diet Coke. That was for a different category of customers, and that did pretty well, and that taste was very close to the Pepsi one. And in the market share, Coca-Cola was the original Coca-Cola was number one, Pepsi number two, and Diet Cola was number three. So then in 1985, Coca-Cola reformulated its classic drink to create new Coke, aiming to compete more effectively with Pepsi. So what happened in 1985? Coca-Cola changed the formula, changed the taste of the original cola and launched it as the new Coke. And subsequently, in a span of 3 weeks after launching this, they stopped manufacturing the original Coke. They felt that since Diet Coke has done well, probably this new Coke will be able to get back the market share that Coca-Cola is losing to Pepsi. Okay. So what happened? The launch was met with immediate customer outrage. So what happened? I'm sure you understand this word, meaning of this word outrage. So people said that no, we're not happy with this. Where is the original cola? And people actually started boycotting this new cola. The demand can bring back the original cola. Because when people thought about cola, it was synonymous, or when people thought about Coca-Cola, it was synonymous with that old cola taste. And now they're getting something new, which the market rejected point blank. So the backlash was due to the emotional connection that people had with the original Coke. Huge backlash. It got rejected in US market. It got rejected in Canada. And within 3 months, what happened? Coca-Cola had to reintroduce the original formula as Coca-Cola Classic, which was made with enthusiasm and restored consumer loyalty. So we stopped the production. Within 3 weeks after launching the new Coke, there was a huge backlash. It failed miserably. Okay. And then, in a span of 3 months, they had to get back or reintroduce the original Coca-Cola. And still, yet they have never tried to tweak the taste of the original cola. The cola that you are having today is actually based on the formula that was there in the 1880s when the company started. And what goes in, nobody knows. It's a well-protected secret. In them, nobody else or people outside the Coca-Cola don't know what goes into what are the ingredients, what goes into the making of Coca-Cola. What I will say is a trade secret, very well protected. So what it tells you, what this case tells you, that what we have to keep in mind as a marketer, as a brand manager, for this particular case, again, like I told you the other day, the factors leading to failure, it will vary from one brand to another. Okay? So people started these brand failures so that they don't end up making the mistakes that these big companies make. So what lessons you can get from this case?
They destroyed the core competence. Core competence was the original classic one. So
So competence is something different.
not every product is
Product is same. Product is same product. They have not come up with the same product right, because the taste was changed. So you have to keep in mind customers' emotion, the emotional connection that customers have with your brand, with your product, with your service. You should not try to tweak it. You should not try to play with that. So emotional connections play a significant role in brand loyalty, and any changes should be approached with caution. So as a brand manager, you have to keep in mind that in no way this gets disturbed. If that happens, then it will result in your brand failure. You will face problems. So do not try to play with this emotional connections. These emotional connections are very strong, okay, and it leads to strong brand loyalty. So if you play with this, there will be consequences. Clear? Next, I will talk about Polaroid. I'm sure you've heard about this brand. But again, it went bankrupt. So Polaroid was a pioneer in instant photography. You understand instant photography? What it is? So you click the photo of the picture and then you get the print of that photo immediately. And Polaroid was the pioneer in that. And with that single product, okay, they became highly successful. They were the number one as far as camera manufacturers or companies were concerned. Even Kodak could not compete with them. Okay, they're hugely successful. And you click a photo, get the photo instantly. That became it to the customers. Because it saved time. For other cameras, you have to take the photo, you have to aim for the, I don't know whether you've seen those reels that are available. So 36, 24, so you need to wait for that briefly, then you go to the studio, place the order, it will come to you 10 days or maybe a week's time, 15 days. So what instant photography or instant camera did is that it played on the time factor. You don't have to wait for the photo to see how it is, how you are looking. Okay, you can get it instantly. But it failed to adapt to the digital revolution. What happened in the 1990s? Digital photography was introduced. So the manufacturers, they were moving from these analog cameras to the digital cameras. What was the advantage of the digital cameras? You don't need to print photos. You don't need to print photos. Anything else?
The instantaneous feeling that they used to get from Polaroid is also being met by the digital camera.
So Polaroid's success factor was based on what? Based on time. You get the photo. Digital photography went a step ahead. You are not only able to see the photo immediately, but you can also share it with others. With the advent of internet, what happened? You could share that photo with others, even to people who are in other parts of the world. You take a photo, post it nowadays on Instagram, Facebook. So immediately your friends, your relatives, your family members, other places, other countries, other continents, they come to see. So when this digital photography hit Polaroid, that time factor, the very factor which was the reason for their success. And what happened with Polaroid? They were overconfident that no, instant photography will survive. It will survive this digital onslaught. So when digital photography, when this technology came, it was introduced in the market, Polaroid didn't jump into the ship at that point of time. They felt that no, we will survive, we will be able to overcome this. Kodak could not do anything to us what digital photography did. But the realization came late that no, days for instant photography is gone, it's over. The entire market is moving to digital photography. So that realization came late. But by that time, other players have entered the market and they have captured the market share. So the transition part, Polaroid was late. So as digital cameras gained popularity, Polaroid sales went down. And think about the company which ruled the photography market or the analog camera market for such a long time, for so many decades. It went bankruptcy in 2001. The company struggled to compete with digital photography, which offered convenience and cost effectiveness. Cost effectiveness why? Because actually you don't need to spend any money on getting the photo printed. So convenience was time, convenience was sharing with others, and again we do it at almost no cost. It's sharing market. So what as a marketer or brand manager, what lessons you will learn from this case? That you have to adapt to technological changes that are taking place in the market. Failure to recognize and respond to these changes, respond to this consumers' changes in the consumers' taste and preferences will lead to obsolescence. So from being the market leader going to from being the market leader to bankruptcy. So that tells you the story. So these are the things that you have to keep in mind. You need to change yourself along with the changes in the market dynamics. So these are all big shot companies that I am talking about. Next is Virgin Cola. As I told you the other day, that Richard Branson himself is a brand. Okay, there's a lot of aura. We introduced a lot of different kinds of products and services. Okay, and most of them they became successful. But one failure story of Virgin is the Virgin Cola. So Virgin Cola was launched in 1994 in an attempt to compete with Coca-Cola and Pepsi. So can you tell me, I'll talk about the reasons, but what do you think can be the probable reason for the failure of Virgin Cola? I'll tell you the but what do you think? What can be the reason? Why it could not compete with Coca-Cola and Pepsi? Because Virgin, they grew lots of money, they spend a lot of money on advertisement and beer. Then why fail? Because as far as Coca-Cola and Pepsi are concerned, they spend a lot of money on promotion, on advertisement, and marketing communication. So Virgin have the resources to do similar kind of advertisement, similar kind of promotion. So then why? Again, before they launched these, they went for those blind tests, and you were seeing that Virgin Cola is doing well. But still, it failed. What can be the reason?
Because according to me, I think that customer already very much favor Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and Virgin Cola happened just try to make the identification of the customer. Customer already minded that I just minded the Coca-Cola.
So it might be it's aggressive marketing by the Coca-Cola, whereas Virgin Cola's marketing strategy was less than the Coca-Cola. Next can be it was a diversified company having many businesses within the fold of Virgin. While Coca pinpointed few products or few product lines, maybe, I don't know exactly because I haven't studied this, but as I know Virgin, it has got what is called that market penetration again with the product.
Right. That is coming to that. So initially there was excitement, it did well, it started out well, but could not sustain it. The major reason for which Virgin Cola could not compete with Coca-Cola is because of the distribution channel. The kind of extensive distribution network that Coca-Cola and Pepsi had created over a period of time for being in the business for such a long time, that they were available everywhere and anywhere. And that's where Virgin Cola fell. Initially it did well, taste was not that bad. It could have competed with Coca-Cola and Pepsi. But they fell because they could not match with Coca-Cola or Pepsi as far as the distribution is concerned. That means it was not available everywhere and anywhere. And many retail stores, they were not ready to provide shelf space to Virgin Cola. And that was a major reason for Virgin Cola's failure. So despite being priced 15 to 20% lower than Coca-Cola and Pepsi, it failed to attract enough customers. Coca-Cola and Pepsi successfully prevented Virgin from securing essential shelf space in half of the UK's supermarkets. So it was launched in UK, it was also launched across the Atlantic, but in both the places it failed because of Coca-Cola and Pepsi making the distribution channels, the network, making it unavailable to Virgin Cola. Because they knew about Virgin Cola's financial resources, how strong they are. So if you give them an inch, it will take a mile away from you. How do you stop it? Block the distribution channels. So what lesson you can learn from this brand failure? Entering saturated market requires a strong differentiation strategy and a deep understanding of consumer preferences. So by the time Virgin Cola entered the cola market, it was saturated. It was dominated by two brands. And if you want to make a penetration, if you want shelf space, if you want the retailers to carry your product, you have to come with a very strong differentiation. That means there should be something unique, something novel, something which is not available in other brands. And that difference should be very strong, that should be very unique, that should be totally different from what others are offering. Without that, it will be difficult for you to become successful in a saturated market. So Pond's toothpaste. So
in case
again,
of cola, over the years, many companies have tried. Now even companies have tried, but with the amount of money Coca-Cola and Pepsi spends, so every company is failing. So what
the
this
smaller companies have been acquired
big
by
companies are also
Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They have been acquired.
big companies are also trying. Reliance is trying now with Coca-Cola. But the amount of Coca-Cola spends on they provide refrigerators to every shop. So how can a
It's
company?
not about the again, they are doing a lot of things with the middlemen, providing a lot of convenience. Everybody does that. But again, it boils down to customers' perception, their preferences. So the distribution network that I talked about, very important. So you may be aware of it, but it's not. If it is not available in the market, then it's not going to work. So that, and if you want to compete with Pepsi and Coca-Cola, you will match with their advertisement, but then again, the product that you are offering, yes, that it has to be drastically different and accepted by the market. Then only it will work. Otherwise, even in the long run, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years later also, you will be having only these two individual products. So Pond's toothpaste. So can you tell me about this? Because Professor Gold briefly talked about it. This Pond's toothpaste, why it failed.
Pond is maybe for the powder as well as famous for powder. And toothpaste is fit because it is also part of marketing strategy that customer they develop the quality and
This was being, perhaps this was being taught to us.
Yeah, I think you talked briefly about
Yeah.
it.
Thing is this, the pond has, means what I recollect, that ponds initially introduced itself as a beauty product or something with a special kind of smell in it and texture and everything. Okay, and the same thing they introduced in the toothpaste for oral hygiene and etc. So people might have thought that it is might have the same product or same product line or the whatever for which something that they failed. So far I can recall.
So yeah, this is another example where a well-known brand failed when they went for the So Ponds, a very well-known brand, a very popular brand in India, especially in the skincare section, personal care section. So it launched a toothpaste in India, trying to leverage its existing brand equity. The perception was that since Ponds is such a well-known brand, so popular, so if we come up with another product, what will happen? Customers will accept it because of the brand. So Ponds, the well-known face cream brand, did not enjoy the same level of popularity when it ventured into the toothpaste market. The reason is that before launching the product, they went for this blind test to see that if it will work or not. And see, in the blind test, what happens? Participants could not distinguish between Ponds toothpaste from Colgate. So they conducted a lot of these blind tests, and in all those tests, they found that the participants, the customers, they could not differentiate between the taste of Colgate and Ponds toothpaste. So that means what? It gave them this idea or perception that it will work. It tastes like a toothpaste. So based on that, they went forward. However, when the product was actually launched in the market, it faced failure. When the Ponds name and branding were associated with the toothpaste, consumer interest was minimal. That was a big surprise for the brand managers, because earlier they had also gone for extension from Ponds cream to Ponds soap. It did well. Okay. But then, why this failed? The major reason for this failure was that all the earlier extension that Ponds did, they were connected by a similar fragments. So that means what? One of the essential feature, one of the essential factor for Ponds' success was because of these similar fragments. And the toothpaste also had a similar kind of fragrance. And that's why people could not associate with the toothpaste part, because in people's mind the perception was that Ponds product are to be used externally. I can use it on the skin, so basically. But it's not something that will be used internally. With the toothpaste, what you're doing, you're brushing your teeth. So for most people, Ponds was associated with fragrance and freshness, and it was used only for external application, not for internal application, and that's where it failed. It could not convince people that no, this is a different product and it can be used for internal application, because people could not relate with that. People could not make that association. The next case is related to Kellogg's. And here, very interestingly, the reason for Kellogg's failure when it was initially launched in India was not because of the product, not because of the brand name, but because of culture. You understand culture? What is culture? What is culture?
Long-term civilization practice,
Long term?
civilizational practice may turn into culture.
It is a belief system that we have.
So it is the norms, values and beliefs that exist in our society. And this culture, it varies from country to country. Even if you think about India, it's a country with so much of heterogeneity. So in a country like India, there will also be subcultures. So cultures pertaining to a particular region. And Kellogg's felt because of their misunderstanding, misinterpretation of the culture in India. Because country-wise culture varies. So Kellogg's introduced cornflakes. We call it that cereals. And they introduced this cornflakes as a breakfast food for the entire family. Okay. It's a very successful brand across the globe. India was a big market. It was an emerging market in the 90s. So Kellogg's launched the cornflakes in India. But it failed. Why it failed? It failed because of the food habits of the Indian people. Across India, the thing is that for breakfast, what we have, most of the households, generally what we have, or what we consume, parathas, sabjis. Okay, that's what breakfast means for us, something very heavy. So cornflakes was altogether a different food item. So initially people purchased a packet of cornflakes, they consumed it and they followed the law. Okay. Because the traditional one, the common thing was having a heavy breakfast. So people purchased a packet. Initially Kellogg's did well, but in a span of few months, it realized that it's not working in India. And then they realized it's not working because the households, the families in India, they prefer something different for their breakfast. So what it did, went back to the drawing board and repositioned, relaunched the cornflakes as a breakfast food for school-going kids. That's how they relaunched. That's how they repositioned themselves. Breakfast food for school-going kids. The schools, kids, they were leaving for schools early in the morning. So you give them cornflakes. It's good for health, and it will also keep their tummy fill up or full for long period. And then it worked. Then it worked. Then it hit with the consumers in India. Those parents were like, okay, it's a good one for the kids. So they will not feel hungry for a long time. Okay. So that brought the satisfaction. Over a passage of time, what happened, people have now become very health conscious, especially the young people. So there are a lot more concerns and awareness about keeping yourself fit. And slowly what happened, it was not only the kids, but especially the young people, those who are going to office early, they started consuming games. And now it's, well, it has a good market share, it is a very steady business. So the reason for Kellogg's failure was culture. And there are many examples, if you look at other companies, where companies have failed because of culture. Just to give you another example, that's not there. I'm sure you've heard about Hallmark cards. Hallmark cards. Nowadays, probably in our generation, we used to have these cards, give it to somebody on some occasions, birthday, marriage anniversary, Father's Day, Mother's Day, Teacher's Day. We used to give cards. Probably I don't know your generation will never used it because now we have WhatsApp and other social media platforms. So Hallmark was a very popular brand as far as greetings card industry was concerned, and it did very well across the globe. But it failed in France. Hallmark failed in France. Can you guess? Again, the reason was culture, nothing else. It failed in France. The reason is that Hallmark's card, they come with a printed message. So when we used to go to the store to purchase a card, we look at each card and find the one with the nice message. Okay. So Hallmark cards, they used to come with a printed message. But in France, the culture was that people prefer to write the messages on their own. So you give me a blank card, I will write the message based on my thoughts, based on what I feel, and then I will give it to somebody else on occasion. So Hallmark fell in France because of this printed material that they had inside the card. The difference was the failure, the reason for the failure was the culture. So if you look at some of the examples in the marketing literature, you'll find a lot of well-known brands, they have failed in many parts of the world because of the differences in the culture. So as a marketer, you should avoid attempting to alienate consumers from their cultural roots. Think about McDonald's. When they entered the market, what they did? They tweaked their menu. There is no such thing like the Maharaja, and then they had this burger, Maharaja burger. It was not available elsewhere in the world. They did it specifically keeping in mind the food preferences of the people. The last example that I will talk about is about Blockbuster. It's an American company. I don't know whether you've heard about it. It was there in the 90s. You know, in the 90s, the video rental. Have you seen those video cassettes? Another video cassettes, big one. So there was a big rental industry where there were these retail stores where you go, you subscribe or you pay money and you get the video cassettes of a movie. And maybe you can keep it for 24 hours, watch it and then return. In US, it was also done through mails. And Blockbuster was the leading video rental chain of outlets. So throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Blockbuster was the leading video rental company in the United States. And remember, Netflix also started their business as a video rental company. Okay. By the early 2000s, Blockbusters had over 9,000 stores globally and more than 45 million registered users. So these statistics will give you an idea how big and how successful they were. Now, obviously people had to rent those videos, they had to pay money for it. But a major part, a major success factor for their business was this late fees. So they used to charge heavily for late return. So if you return the cassettes late, there will be a fine. There will be a fine. And that fine was a hefty fine. And a major portion of their earnings was actually coming from this fine. So Blockbuster's revenue heavily relied on late fees, a model that penalized customers for keeping their video tapes too long. There's almost $1 per day. Now, at the turn of the century, what happened? Almost every household they had a PC, was internet, okay, and things started to move from the traditional marketplace to the digital marketplace. So what happened? OTT. What is it? What's the full form of OTT? Full form of OTT. Oh, the young people. OTT? Find out and tell you. It's very simple. Yes? Over the So, this streaming business started to come. And Netflix was the kind of pioneer for that. Because Netflix realized that people are moving from the traditional marketplace to the digital marketplace. That was happening with e-commerce. So they thought we should come up with something where people will be able to watch a lot of movies, a lot of programs, okay, sports, entertainment by just sitting at their home. So they realized that, they understood that opportunity and exploited it. And that's where Blockbuster felt. So as market conditions evolved, consumer demand for online streaming surged in the late 2000s. However, Blockbuster still continued with their old model of business and did not transition to online streaming. So they failed to realize the changes that are taking place in the market. They failed to make that movement. They didn't went for this moving their business to OTT platforms, and they felt and they went out of market. Just think about STD booths. You had STD booths. You've seen it very popular 20 years back, 30 years back. But do you see them now? Because once mobile phone came, everybody had access to it. STD business was over. So Blockbuster was a leading video rental chain. It was ahead of Netflix, but it fell into transition to digital streaming, which Netflix did, and now Netflix is the market leader. And I'm sure all of us here in this room, we have a subscription to Netflix, right? Most of us we have this nowadays. So just quickly let me talk about some of the important lessons that we have learned from this brand failures. I'll quickly go through it. So you need to understand consumers' needs and preferences. You must respect the local culture. Continuous innovation and adaptation is required, especially when a lot of technological changes or advancement is happening. Polaroid failed to do it. Blockbuster failed to do it. Establishing trust with consumers is crucial, and brand should focus on quality and customer experience. So these are some of the reasons which we have understood or realized after going through those cases of brand failures. And there is one book which you can read. It's a very good book.